The marble lobby of Barton Tech gleamed beneath the pale morning light, every polished surface reflecting ambition like a mirror designed to remind visitors of their place. Men and women in sharp suits strode across the floor, their heels clicking like metronomes of industry. Their voices rose and fell in clipped tones, echoing against the glass walls as if they were part of some vast and efficient machine. Nothing in this grand cathedral of business belonged to children, and yet there she was, small, trembling, her golden hair catching the filtered light as she clutched a wrinkled envelope to her chest. Dorothy Cromwell's tiny shoes squeaked against the marble as she crossed the threshold, her blue eyes wide with equal parts fear and determination. To her, the towering lobby felt like a forest of strangers. Executives brushed past her, their gazes sliding away as though her presence was a glitch in their ordered world. Some slowed, curious at the sight of a child alone, but the tide of corporate urgency swept them forward before they could stop. Dorothy's hands tightened on the envelope until the paper crinkled, her knuckles whitening. Mommy had said this letter was very, very important, and Dorothy had promised solemnly, desperately, that she would deliver it. She spotted the reception desk, a dark slab of polish wood manned by a woman whose auburn hair was pinned with the precision of someone who lived by routine. Margaret Harrison had answered countless questions, redirected thousands of calls, and turned away more visitors than she could count, but she had never seen a sight like this. A little girl, no taller than the counter, tiptoeing to peer over his edge with an expression so earnest it pierced through the armor of professionalism. "Excuse me, ma'am," Dorothy said, her voice barely rising above the hum of the lobby. Her breath caught as she spoke, but she steadied herself, just as Mommy had told her to. "Can you please give this letter to the most important man in this building?" She lifted the envelope with both hands, as if it were spun from glass. Margaret blinked, her mouth parting in surprise. She leaned forward, softening despite herself. "Sweetheart, are you lost? Where's your mom or dad?" Dorothy shook her head with quick determination, curls bouncing. "I'm not lost. Mommy said I have to give this to him. She said it's very important. The most important letter she's ever written." Her words trembled at the edges, but her grip on the envelope never faltered. Margaret glanced at the envelope. The handwriting was careful, elegant, the kind one used for things that mattered. Across the front, in neat script, were the words, "Kevin Barton, CEO, urgent, personal." Margaret felt a prickle run down her spine. She had worked here for 8 years, had fielded countless requests to speak to Mr. Barton, but never one like this. "Sweetheart," she tried gently, "Mr. Barton is very busy. He's in meetings all day." Dorothy cut her off, her blue eyes glistening but steady. "Please. Mommy said this letter could save both of us." The words struck Margaret with the weight of something far larger than the child standing before her. She hesitated, her instincts warring with her training. Protocol dictated that she smile, reassure the girl, and call security. But something about the desperation shining in those eyes, the kind of desperation that knew no pretense, stirred something deeply maternal in her. She reached for the phone. 40 floors above, Kevin Barton's intercom buzzed with Margaret's voice. She never interrupted him without cause. "Sir," she said, her tone edged with something unusual. "There's a little girl here who insists on giving you a letter. It's marked urgent and personal. She says it must be read today." Kevin's pen froze mid-signature. "A child? A letter?" He exhaled sharply, irritation already building. But Margaret's voice wavered in a way he had never heard before. She wasn't just relaying a message, she was pleading. For the first time in years, Kevin Barton hesitated. And far below, Dorothy Cromwell tightened her hold on the wrinkled envelope, unaware that the words inside it would unravel everything. The 42nd floor of Barton Tech towered above Seattle like a fortress of glass and steel. Kevin Barton's office was its citadel, a place where the world ended at the edge of his desk. From here, the city stretched endlessly in shades of gray and blue, a view most men would pause to admire. But Kevin rarely looked at it. Beauty had long since become invisible to him, buried beneath spreadsheets, contracts, and the weight of his empire. Kevin Barton was not born into this fortress, he had built it, brick by invisible brick, over 13 relentless years. Once, he had been a scrappy software prodigy with sleepless nights and wild dreams. Now, at 33, he was a multimillionaire, his name whispered with awe in the business world. His competitors called him ruthless, his employees called him cold, and the press called him the Iron CEO. None of them were wrong. He had constructed an empire, But in the process, he had also constructed walls. Walls so high even he no longer knew what lay on the other side. His office was immaculate, sterile to the point of suffocation. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed Elliott Bay, but the shelves behind him were lined with awards instead of photographs. Not a single trace of family existed here, no smiling faces, no candid memories, no reminders that Kevin Barton was more than a brand. The only personal detail was the watch on his wrist, a gift from a father who had demanded perfection and offered nothing in return. Kevin's phone buzzed. He didn't flinch. He was in the middle of a quarterly review, his pen marking figures with military precision. Margaret never disturbed him unless it was necessary, yet her voice came through the intercom, low and hesitant, an edge of something unusual clinging to her words. "Sir, there's a little girl in the lobby. She insists on delivering a letter to you personally. It's marked urgent, and I think you should see her." Kevin's jaw tightened. A little girl? Barton Tech was no playground. He didn't have the time or patience for sentimental distractions. Still, there was something in Margaret's voice, something softer than her usual clipped professionalism. For 8 years, she had never once begged him to break protocol. Margaret, Kevin said, his tone sharp as the blade of a knife. "You know the rules. Redirect her. That's what we do." A pause. Then, Margaret's voice, firmer this time. "With respect, sir, I don't think we can. There's something about her. And the letter. It's handwritten. Addressed to you. She's frightened, but she won't leave. I think you should read it." Kevin leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His temples pulsed with the beginnings of a headache. He had meetings lined back to back, investors waiting for calls, projects teetering on deadlines. But Margaret had never pleaded. Never once. "Fine," he said finally, curtain clipped. "Send her up. Make it quick." He ended the call and rubbed the bridge of his nose. A child, here of all places. What kind of parent allowed their daughter to wander into the marble jaws of Barton Tech? He felt irritation rising, but beneath it, something else stirred. Curiosity, a faint, unwelcome tug in his chest. The elevator hummed its way toward his floor, carrying with it a girl whose very presence would test the steel walls around his life. Kevin didn't know it yet, but the moment he looked into Dorothy Cromwell's eyes, the fortress he had spent his entire life building would begin to crack. For years, he had believed his world was unshakable, but this was no ordinary interruption. This was destiny, wrapped in a wrinkled envelope. Climbing 40 floors to change everything. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Kevin Barton felt something he could not name, an unease that tasted like fear. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, spilling golden light across the hushed corridor of the executive floor. Dorothy Cromwell stepped out, her tiny shoes pressing into thick carpeting so soft it seemed to swallow her steps. She had never seen hallways like these, lined with abstract paintings that looked more expensive than her mother's entire apartment. Chandeliers glittered overhead, crystal prisms scattering fractured rainbows on the walls. But Dorothy did not stop to stare. She held the envelope tighter, her blue eyes locked on the tall figure waiting at the end of the corridor. Margaret's hand lingered on the girl's shoulder as if reluctant to let go. But when Kevin Barton appeared in the doorway of his office, Margaret stepped back. For the first time in her career, she prayed silently that her instincts had not been wrong. Kevin Barton filled the frame of his office door like a shadow given form. His dark suit was immaculate, his steel blue eyes cool and unreadable. The man radiated authority, the kind that silenced entire boardrooms with a single look. But as Dorothy stood before him, the letter trembling in her hands, Kevin's gaze faltered. Not for long, not enough for the world to notice, but just enough for Margaret to see the briefest flicker of surprise. Because those eyes, the child's eyes, were his own. Dorothy tilted her head, the envelope pressed to her chest, and in that small, innocent gesture, Kevin felt the breath catch in his throat. It was a tilt he knew well. He had done it 1,000 times in moments of thought, a quirk unnoticed by anyone but himself. And now, reflected back at him from the face of a child, it felt less like coincidence and more like accusation. "Are you Mr. Barton?" Dorothy's voice was timid but steady, the voice of someone who had practiced this moment in her head again and again. Kevin cleared his throat, straightening his shoulders as if to shake off the strange unease gnawing at him. "Yes," he said, his tone clipped, professional. "That's me. Who are you?" "My name is Dorothy Cromwell," she said quickly, her curls bouncy with the force of her words. She extended the letter, her hands trembling. "This is for you. Mommy said you have to read it today. She said it's the most important letter she's ever written." Kevin did not move at first. He stared at the envelope as if it were a snake poised to strike. Something about the way the child spoke the urgency. The way her small voice carried the weight of something far beyond her years nerved him. He wanted to dismiss it, to brush it off as a foolish distraction, but he could in single quotes T-die slowly. Almost reluctantly, he reached out and took the envelope. His fingers brushed against Dorothy's tiny hands, and a jolt passed through him, sharp and unbidden. He masked it quickly, but inside, his thoughts were already unraveling. "What's this about?" Kevin asked. Though his voice lacked its usual edge, Dorothy's lips pressed together, and for a moment her composure cracked. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she held them back with a stubbornness that startled him. "Mommy said it might save both of us," she whispered. Margaret's breath caught behind them. Kevin froze, the words echoing like a ghost in his mind. "Save both of us." He looked down at the letter again. It was wrinkled from her small, determined grip, the elegant script spelling his name with haunting precision. Kevin's chest tightened, though he did not know why. "Please," Dorothy said softly, and in that single word, her voice carried a depth of desperation no 7-year-old should have ever known. The office behind Kevin was a study in isolation, all glass and silence, but now it felt like a stage set for something inevitable. He stepped aside slowly, gesturing her in. Margaret hesitated, but Dorothy straightened her shoulders and walked past Kevin into the heart of his fortress. The envelope was still in his hand, heavy as lead. Kevin Barton, who had stared down hostile takeovers, crushed competitors, and walked away from empires burning, found himself standing in his own office, unsettled by the presence of a child with eyes that mirrored his own for the first time in years. He felt his carefully constructed world shift beneath him, and though he had not yet opened the letter, some part of him already knew, when he did, nothing would ever be the same again. The door clicked shut behind Margaret, leaving Kevin and Dorothy alone in a silence that felt heavier than the walls of glass surrounding them. The city stretched endlessly outside the window, but Kevin barely noticed it now. His focus was fixed on the envelope in his hand, its creases whispering of the journey it had taken in the grip of the small, unyielding child. For a long moment, Kevin said nothing. He simply stared at the envelope, his thumb tracing the loop of his name scrawled in elegant script. His name, written by a hand that clearly knew him. He didn't want to ask, but he heard his voice anyway, low, sharp. "Your mother wrote this." Dorothy nodded, her golden curls trembling with emotion. "She said you had to read it today. She said it might be her last letter." Kevin's stomach nodded. A stranger's desperation shouldn't matter to him, but the weight in Dorothy's tone pressed against something he buried deep. His chest felt suddenly tight. He pulled at the flap, the sound of tearing paper loud in the hush of the office. Dorothy's eyes never left his face. He unfolded the letter with hands steadier than he felt. The handwriting was beautiful, controlled, every curve of ink carrying both elegance and urgency. At the top, the name was written in deliberate strokes. Kevin's jaw tensed, but his eyes moved down the page. "If you are reading this, it means my time is shorter than I had hoped. I am Nancy Cromwell. Perhaps you remember me, though you may not. Years ago, our paths crossed only briefly, but from that encounter came something you never knew and something you may not want to know. Her name is Dorothy." Kevin's gaze flicked up at the girl, who now sat primly on the edge of one of his leather chairs, her feet dangling far above the ground. She stared at him with those piercing blue eyes, his eyes. Damn it, and then looked down at her hands as if she were afraid. She had already asked too much of him. He forced himself to keep reading. "You believe you cannot have children. I know this, because you told me so once. You said your body was incapable, that you had made peace with it. But I am telling you now, Kevin, you were wrong. Dorothy is living proof of that. She is yours, and soon, she may have no one but you." Kevin's throat constricted. His fingers trembled slightly, though he hid it by tightening his grip on the page. He could hear his pulse pounding in his ears. This was impossible. This was a lie. He had been told no. He knew that fatherhood was not within his grasp. It was a fact, a truth as immovable as steel. And yet here it was, scrawled across paper, reflected in the gaze of a little girl sitting in his office. He read on, though each word felt like it was being carved into him. "I do not ask this lightly. I know the walls you have built, the fortress of ambition you hide inside, but those walls cannot keep her out. Kevin, one look at her, and you will see yourself. One moment with her, and you will know she is yours. Please, if I am gone, don't let her face this world alone. She is brave, but she is still just a child. She needs you, Kevin. She needs her father. The word struck like a hammer. Father. Kevin slammed the letter down on his desk and stood abruptly, the chair skidding back. His breath came sharp, ragged. He turned toward the window as if the glass could shield him from the accusation. Bleeding off the page, his reflection stared back at him, his strong jaw, his cold eyes, and for the first time, he saw Dorothy's features superimposed over his own. No, he muttered under his breath, his fists curling. This is manipulation. It has to be. Dorothy's small voice cut through his denial. She said you'd be mad. She said you wouldn't believe it at first. Kevin spun back toward her. Her calmness unnerved him. This wasn't the tantrum of a child, it was the quiet strength of someone carrying a burden far too heavy. The sight of it twisted something in him, something he thought long dead. The letter lay open on his desk, its final lines still visible. You may doubt me. You may hate me for keeping this from you, but you cannot deny her. Not when she looks at you. Not when she speaks your name. For in her, Kevin, lives the proof you never believed possible. In her, lives the part of you thought lost. Kevin's eyes met Dorothy's again, blue on blue, a mirror and a question he could not answer. For the first time in his career, Kevin Barton, the man who never wavered, felt the ground crack beneath him. And though he tried to steel himself, though he tried to cling to the fortress he had built, he could not silence the truth that echoed in his mind. With every glance at the little girl before him, what if the letter was right? Asterisk, the hum of the city outside was distant, muted by the thick glass walls of Kevin Barton's office. But inside, silence pressed heavy as stone. The letter still lay on his desk, its words burning into the polished mahogany like firebrands he couldn't extinguish. Dorothy sat quietly, her small hands folded in her lap, patient in a way that no 7-year-old should ever have had to be. Her stillness was its own kind of demand. Do you believe me? Do you believe her? Kevin had no answer. His mind was a storm. Every certainty he had built his life on, the sterility, the isolation, the belief that he was untouchable, was being ripped apart by ink on paper and the gaze of a child who mirrored him too closely to ignore. Then came the sound of the elevator, a soft chime, the slide of metal doors, high heels striking against the carpet with sharp, deliberate rhythm. Susan Osborne stepped into the corridor. She was elegance incarnate, a woman who had fought tooth and nail to secure her place not only in Kevin's life, but in the shimmering world of Barton Tech. Her dark hair framed a face that had graced society columns, and her smile, practiced, precise, had won investors and allies alike. But as she neared the open doorway of Kevin's office, the smile faltered, because she saw Dorothy. The resemblance was immediate, undeniable, cruel. Blue eyes, the same tilt of the head, that impossible familiarity that Susan had come to know in the man she had devoted years to. Her breath caught, her hand tightening on the leather strap of her bag. For the first time in a long while, Susan Osborne felt fear. As Kevin looked up, his expression unreadable, but Susan's trained eyes caught the slight tension in his jaw. She stepped inside, her gaze flicking between the child and the letter spread across the desk. Kevin. Her voice was careful, too careful, laced with something brittle. What is this? Dorothy straightened in her chair, the courage in her small frame startling even Kevin. I'm Dorothy Cromwell, she said softly, but firmly. My mommy wrote Mr. Barton a letter. She said it's important. She said it might save us. Susan's heart clenched at the words, not because she believed them, but because she knew Kevin might. Her eyes narrowed. Kevin, this is absurd. You can't actually be entertaining this story. She gestured at the letter, her voice sharp now, brittle edges cracking through her polished facade. Anyone can write a letter. Anyone can make a child look like someone. You don't know these people. You don't owe them anything. Kevin's gaze darkened. Susan, just her name, spoken low, but it carried a warning. He did not like being told what he owed. Still, Susan pressed on. Panic whispered through her veins, but she masked it with cool defiance. Think about it. If this gets out, if anyone even suspects, it could destroy you. Everything you built, Kevin, your reputation, your empire. Don't let a stranger walk in here with a child and a story and undo everything. Her words struck, but they did not pierce. Kevin's mind was clouded by the weight of the letter, the resemblance in Dorothy's eyes, the haunting echo of Nancy Cromwell's plea. Dorothy's voice cut the tension, trembling but steady. I'm not lying. Mommy said he's my dad. She said he's the only one who can keep me safe now. Susan's face paled, fury simmering beneath the surface. She crouched down, meeting the child's eyes with a smile too sharp to be kind. Sweetheart, sometimes mommies say things that aren't true. Sometimes they make mistakes. Don't you think maybe your mommy was confused? Dorothy shook her head so hard her curls bounced, tears brimming, but refusing to fall. She wasn't confused. She never lies to me. The air crackled with the weight of her words. Susan rose, her smile gone, her eyes flashing with something colder. She looked at Kevin now, straight on. If you want answers, get a DNA test. That's the only way to settle this. And when it proves she's not yours, this will all go away. Kevin said nothing, his face a mask of stone. But Susan knew him. She saw the crack, the hesitation, the possibility that he could believe this child. That was unacceptable, because Susan Osborne had clawed her way into Kevin's world, piece by piece, building herself into the perfect partner for the perfect man. And she would not, could not, allow it all to be shattered by a dying woman's letter and a little girl with his eyes. She smiled then, cold and polished, her voice dripping with practiced reason. Do the test, Kevin. Let's end this nonsense, once and for all. But deep down, even as she said it, Susan knew the truth. Once the test was done, nothing would end. It would only begin. Asterisk, the office felt like a battlefield now. The letter lay open on the desk, the air still vibrating with Susan's challenge. Kevin stood by the window, arms folded tight, his reflection caught against the glass, a man at war with himself. Susan lingered near the doorway, her posture elegant, but her eyes sharp, watching, calculating. And in the middle of it all sat Dorothy Cromwell, small and silent, her legs swinging above the carpet. The silence stretched until it threatened to snap. Then Dorothy spoke. I came by myself. Her voice was quiet, but carried like a bell in the stillness. Kevin turned, frowning. What? I came here on the bus, Dorothy said, her small hands gripping the armrest of the chair. All the way across the city. Mommy couldn't come. She's too sick. So I promised her I would. I promised her I'd be brave. Kevin's eyes narrowed, studying her. He wanted to dismiss it as childish exaggeration, but there was no lie in her voice. No tremor of invention. Just truth, raw and simple. Susan scoffed. Kevin, don't indulge this. Children imagine things. They dramatize. Dorothy cut across her, her small voice suddenly sharp. I'm not imagining. I rode the bus. I asked strangers for directions. I walked here, by myself, because Mommy said this letter was the most important thing she ever wrote. Her chin lifted, trembling but proud. And for the first time, Kevin felt something he hadn't in years. Shame. Shame that a 7-year-old had more courage in her tiny frame than he, a man who commanded empires, had in his entire body. Susan's eyes flashed, her smile brittle. And what if your mother lied? What if she told you this story because she wanted something from him? Dorothy's eyes brimmed with tears, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. My mommy doesn't lie. She said he's my daddy, and when she's gone, he'll be the only one left to take care of me. The words landed like stones in Kevin's chest. He had faced hostile investors, savage competitors, the crushing weight of expectations, but nothing had prepared him for the sight of a child, fighting to hold back tears while declaring him her father. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Why? Why would she send you to me? Why now? Dorothy looked up at him with those impossible blue eyes. Because she trusts you? She said you'd understand once you read the letter. She said you'd know I was telling the truth. The silence that followed was suffocating. Kevin turned away, his gaze dragging back to the letter on the desk. His fingers itched to reach for it again, to find some clue that would make sense of the chaos swirling inside him. But his walls, his carefully built walls, were cracking. Susan stepped forward, her voice sharp, desperate. Kevin, don't let her manipulate you. She's just a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. Dorothy's small fist clenched in her lap. I know exactly what I'm saying, she whispered. I know Mommy's dying, and I know she wouldn't have sent me here unless it was the only way. Her words sliced through the room, quiet but devastating. Kevin's breath caught. He stared at Dorothy, truly seeing her now not as an interruption, not as a problem, but as a child carrying the unbearable weight of her mother's last hope. He saw her bravery in the way she sat tall despite trembling shoulders. He saw her strength in the way she met Susan's glare without flinching. He saw himself in her eyes, in her stubbornness, in the courage that defied her small frame for the first time in years. Kevin Barton felt the steel armor around his heart begin to fracture. Susan sensed it too. Panic sparked in her chest as she saw his expression shift, saw the hardness in his eyes give way to something dangerously close to belief. She forced a smile, her tone sugar-sweet, but edged with poison. Then let's prove it. DNA doesn't lie. We'll get the test, and when it proves she's not yours, this fantasy will be over. But Kevin didn't answer her. His gaze was fixed on Dorothy, who sat like a warrior in miniature, her hands shaking, but her spirit unbroken. It was then he realized this child wasn't here to beg for his help. She was here to fight for it, and Kevin Barton, a man who had crushed titans and outwitted kings of industry, felt something new coil in his chest, something that frightened him more than failure, more than lies, the stirrings of responsibility, the first shadow of love. The fortress he had built was no longer safe, and as Dorothy's courage filled the silence, Kevin knew the walls were about to crumble completely. Asterisk, the results arrived in a manila envelope that felt heavier than lead. It had been delivered by courier, discreetly, as Kevin had insisted. No assistance, no interruptions, just him, the child, and the woman whose world revolved around control. The three of them sat in his office, the air taut with tension. Outside, Seattle pulsed with life, cars streaming across the bridge, seagulls wheeling above Elliott Bay. Inside, Barton Tech's top floor was a tomb. Kevin stared at the envelope. His name was written across it in block letters, clinical and detached, as though the truth inside could be boiled down to sterile data points. His hand hovered, fingers twitching but unwilling to tear it open. Dorothy sat across from him, her legs swinging nervously above the floor, her blue eyes wide but steady. She had been patient through the days of waiting, patient through Susan's cold dismissals, patient even through Kevin's silence. Susan, on the other hand, was not patient. She leaned against his desk, arms folded, her diamond watch glittering under the office lights. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, a victor waiting for the battle to end in her favor. "Well," she said smoothly, "open it. Let's put this nonsense to rest." Kevin shot her a look so sharp it silenced her for the moment. He lowered his gaze back to the envelope and tore it open with a single, decisive motion. The paper slid free, smooth and crisp, humming with finality. His eyes scanned the page, trained to absorb information quickly. But the words did not compute at first. His breath caught, not consistent. No paternal match. Kevin Barton was not the biological father of Dorothy Cromwell. The room seemed to tilt. The fortress he had spent a lifetime building, the fortress already cracking, threatened to collapse entirely. His first instinct was relief, sharp and dizzying. This wasn't his responsibility. The story was over. He could send the child home, return to his empire, lock his doors again. But the relief was fleeting, because Dorothy's face fell. Not in a tantrum, not in the wails of a child who didn't get her way, but in a quiet, devastating resignation. She lowered her gaze to her hands, her small shoulders trembling as though she had carried the weight of hope, too heavy for her fragile frame, and Kevin Barton cold. Unshakable. Kevin Barton felt his chest ache like a wound. Susan's smile sharpened, triumphant. "There, it's settled. She's not yours. This can all be forgotten now." But Kevin couldn't look away from Dorothy, from the tears she refused to shed, from the courage that had carried her across the city alone, from the haunting familiarity in her eyes that no paper could erase. Something in him rebelled against the results, against the idea that data alone could dictate truth. His gaze dropped to Nancy Cromwell's letter again, still lying open on his desk. He picked it up with trembling fingers and reread the final paragraph, the one he had skimmed before, the one whose words now cut deeper than any test result. "You may discover that she is not yours by blood. Perhaps she isn't. But Kevin, listen carefully. Someone made you believe you could never father a child. That was a lie. Years ago, your father orchestrated it. He told you what you would believe because he needed you to remain unencumbered, focused on the empire. He made sure the doctors confirmed it. He built your world on a deception. The truth is, you are not sterile. You never were." Kevin's grip on the letter tightened. His father, the stern, unyielding man who had forged him into steel, who had demanded ambition above all else, who had drilled into him that family was weakness. Could it be true that even his body had been weaponized as part of the lie? Susan saw the shift in his expression and moved quickly, her voice sharp. "Kevin, don't listen to this manipulative nonsense. She's trying to trap you. He cut her off, his voice a low growl. Enough. The word thundered in the office. Susan recoiled, stunned. Dorothy lifted her head, startled. Kevin's eyes burned into the letter, into the possibility that everything he had believed about himself was false. If Nancy was telling the truth, if his father had lied, then Dorothy wasn't proof of his sterility. She was proof of his humanity. Proof that somewhere out there, he could have a child of his own. But more than that, Dorothy was proof that blood didn't matter. Kevin looked at her again, really looked, and the decision carved itself into him like stone. He saw her bravery, her vulnerability, her unyielding belief that he was the man her mother had trusted. Whether or not she was his by blood no longer mattered. He crossed the office in 3 strides and knelt before her. His hands trembled as he cupped her small shoulders. Dorothy looked up at him, confusion shimmering in her tear-bright eyes. "I don't care what this says," Kevin said, his voice breaking for the first time in years. He held up the test results, then tossed them aside like worthless scraps. "Paper doesn't decide who you belong to. Blood doesn't decide. I decide. And I'm telling you right now, you're not alone. Not anymore." Dorothy's tears finally spilled, but they were tears of relief. She threw her arms around his neck, and Kevin felt the walls of his fortress collapse entirely, replaced by something raw and terrifying and beautiful. Susan's gasp filled the room. "Kevin, you can't be serious. You're throwing your entire life away for..." He turned his head, his eyes colder than she had ever seen them. "Get out." Her breath caught. She had fought for years to hold her place at his side, but in that moment, she understood it was over. Not because of Nancy's letter, not because of a test, but because Kevin Barton had finally found something stronger than ambition. He had found family. As Susan's heels clicked furiously toward the door, Kevin held Dorothy tighter, the child sobs muffled against his chest. For the first time, the Iron CEO wept too, silent tears streaking down his face as the fortress crumbled around him. His empire could rise and fall. His reputation could soar or shatter. But this little girl, the child who had walked into his world with a wrinkled envelope, had rewritten his destiny, and Kevin Barton, who had lived his entire life armored against the world, finally understood what it meant to be human.